So good afternoon, everyone. My name's Liz McIntyre. I'm Director of Education, Learning and Development at Loros Hospice. I'm facilitating the session today, which is on how to foster a culture of inclusive decision making, a leader's guide to psychological safety. So I'm joined by Aloma, who will be sharing her slides very shortly. Just wanted to let you know really, and I'm sure you're all aware, this is day 5 of our Lead, Connect and Care Festival, and the underpinning theme given the day of the launch is kindness. So we'd like to start these sessions with a video around kindness, which we'll share now. Thank you.
So I think kindness is just taking that little bit of extra time to think through not just what's going on, but how the person you're talking to is feeling. It's that sort of thoughtfulness about the other person's emotions and how they're feeling at a time. It's important because we get so used to just caring for people and treating people that we sometimes almost forget that they've got feelings too. You know, we see people as patients or conditions, and of course, you know, for the people we're talking to, their own emotional state might be, you know, very different from that which we were expecting. So it makes the real difference, I think, between just being treated and being looked after. That's the big difference. And in a work context, I think kindness is just that difference between, you know, turning up and going to work and being really happy and feeling kind of valued and belonging. It makes that difference, I think. One of the things that stands out was just the thoughtfulness that I've seen, actually not in a work context, but in social context, with people looking out for elderly people who are self-isolating and supporting them as they stayed at home. I just saw lots of examples through the work I do with the church, actually, of people just going that extra mile really to support people who were, you know, having to self-isolate, make sure that they didn't feel alone and just look out for them. And, you know, the feedback that I had from the people receiving that was that it just meant the world to them. So those are the things that really stand out, I think, in my mind.
Thank you very much, Andy Williams, our new Chief Exec of the LLR CCGs. So just a couple of housekeeping bits just before we start. So could I ask that everybody keep their cameras off and their mics off as well, just while Aloma's doing her presentation. And then once we finish the formal presentation, we'll move on to questions. So if you have got questions for Aloma, please put them into the comments on the side, the chat box, and I'll pick those up and facilitate them at the end of the session. So I think that's everything that I need to cover. So over to you, Aloma. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Liz. I may have a couple of questions for colleagues within the presentation, if that's okay, just to give people an opportunity to kind of interact with the session today. So I'm just going to share my slides with the group. And first of all, I wanted to say welcome to everybody. It's fantastic that you've all attended the session today, which, as Liz set out, is really about how we can foster a culture of inclusive decision making and the really important role that leaders play in creating psychological safety and enabling that. So I wanted to start off really with an anecdote, if that's okay, and apologies to those of you who may have heard this before. But many of you will know the airline Qantas, or would have heard of it. It's an Australian airline. And Qantas experienced a period of difficulty at a certain point, to the extent that the CEO had a really big challenge to address. And that challenge was around a 2.8 billion Australian dollar deficit, which is a really significant financial challenge to deal with. But due to the excellent leadership of the CEO at the time, Alan Joyce, they were able to turn that $2.8 billion deficit into an $850 million profit. And Alan Joyce was asked, well, how did you turn around Qantas? What was the key deciding factor in your success? And he was expected to say, oh, we engage in really rigorous financial and operational measures in order to address the deficit. But his response actually surprised quite a lot of people, because he said, well, the key thing that made the difference to turning around Qantas was the fact that we had a very inclusive environment and we had a very inclusive culture. And that really is leading us nicely on to what we want to cover today, which is recognising the role of inclusion in terms of the social benefits and the moral imperative for us to do the right thing and include diverse groups of people in our organisations and our system. But essentially, there are other benefits in terms of performance at the team and the organisational level that really make a difference. So in this session this afternoon, we're going to look at two key things. The first is we're going to explore how to foster a climate of inclusive decision making. And we're also going to look at how we can provide leaders with key tools to enable them to create psychological safety in their teams. And we'll go on to explore what we mean by psychological safety during the session and its role in inclusive decision making. But first, it's me. Well, I'm having issues moving my slides along. Apologies. There we go. So first of all, I wanted just to really put a question to the group, really, which is, what is your personal why in terms of inclusion? Because we know that inclusion often starts with I. We all have a key role in making a difference. So it's really important, before we start exploring inclusive decision making and psychological safety, to explore what our personal connection is to inclusion. So the question that I've got for everybody this afternoon is, do you remember a time when you felt highly included? And by highly included, we really do mean a time when you felt able to be your authentic self, where you felt that you could thrive and where you're inspired to do your best work. And this recognises, though, that there are lots of different layers of inclusion, and it's a journey, not a destination in and of itself. So we know that, the foundation of inclusion is around fairness and respect. We equally know that there is a key element of inclusion, which is about being able to bring your unique self to work and to make a unique contribution based on your individual skills and talents, whilst at the same time, of course, feeling that sense of group belonging. And then by highly included, we actually refer to you being inspired and confident, as we said, to be your best self and to do your best work. So if I can just ask colleagues just to reflect on a moment where they felt highly included, and if you're happy to share that in the chat box, that would be fantastic, because I think this is a really important question for us to ask ourselves, because we may have some situations where we feel included but not highly included. So if people can reflect on that and comment in the chat, that would be fantastic. And we'll come back to those comments shortly. But I think this is the key starting point, because if we start to understand a time when we felt highly included, and we remember not just what was said, but how we felt and the impact that had on us as individuals, we then start to move on to another key question, which is, do you remember a time when you made other people feel highly included? And if I just go back one slide, first of all, before we start to reflect on that question as well. Again, it's recognising that journey to inclusion. And we've mentioned fairness and respect, being valued and having that sense of belonging. And we heard Andy Williams refer to that as being important in the video that we've just seen around kindness. And we touched upon being empowered and being able to grow and develop, but equally feeling safe physically and psychologically, and having a culture that is open and transparent is critical as well. So reflecting on those key areas of inclusion, again, if you just want to put in the chat a time when you remember how you made other people feel highly included, whether that was a colleague, whether that was a member of your team, or somebody in another context. But I think these are really some key questions that we should reflect on before we start thinking about our role in the workplace, and how we can engage in inclusive decision making. So what is inclusive decision making? We describe it as a conscious, thorough and rigorous consideration of equity, diversity and inclusion when engaging in decision making. Now that's pretty wordy, but essentially inclusive decision making is about a mindset and a set of behaviours. And it's really critical in terms of developing yourself as an inclusive leader. So around 2 years ago almost now, we as a system embarked on a journey of inclusive decision making, and we developed a framework, a 6-step process, and a set of inclusive leadership behaviours that help to create that climate of inclusive decision making. So I'm just going to touch upon some of those behavioural aspects and cultural aspects that create the right conditions for inclusive decision making. So first of all, we have the key enablers of inclusive decision making. So cognitive diversity is one of those key enablers. So yes, demographic representational diversity is important in terms of age, gender, disability, sexual orientation, but equally so is diversity of thinking. And essentially as a system, we want to ensure that we have both of those types of diversity and that we benefit from that, because we know that there are social benefits in terms of inclusion from drawing on both aspects of diversity, but we equally know that there are performance benefits in terms of improvements to service quality and in terms of better financial outcomes, in terms of having that clear focus on drawing on different ideas, different perspectives, different skill sets. So how do we really benefit from cognitive diversity? Well, we can't benefit from cognitive diversity or demographic diversity for that matter unless we're focused on collective intelligence. So this whole area of collective intelligence is about the intelligence of the group being greater than the intelligence of one individual team member. And this is because as a team or as a group of people, we have the capability and capacity to perform a variety of different tasks and solve problems through different lenses. And that collective intelligence is really important in terms of making optimal decisions, whether that relates to reducing health inequalities or whether that relates to decisions around talent selection and development. So, you know, cognitive diversity and collective intelligence are really key enablers of inclusive decision making and enable us to be more creative and innovative in our approach. But there are other enablers as well. So constructive dissent, for example, being able to have a really rigorous discussion about a particular area, and being able to positively disagree on certain points, to really encourage that reflection on differences of opinion that can lead to better problem solving or to better idea creation and better services ultimately. And then in order to obviously gain the benefits from those enablers that we've covered so far, we need the right type of leadership. And we refer to something called prestige leadership. So leading through prestige is really being able to draw on that collective intelligence, being able to ensure that the decision-making process is a process of negotiation, that one person's view isn't dominating the final decision, i.e. the most senior person around the table, but you're drawing on the collective knowledge of the entire group. And that's really important because we know that when we have prestige-oriented leadership, we're better able to draw on collective intelligence for better outcomes. And Professor Scott Page in the US has done a lot of research around diversity of thinking and how to derive benefit from that. And what he suggested was you needed around 5 to 8 people who thought differently and saw the world through different lenses in order to achieve optimal decision making. But if you didn't have that diversity of thinking around the table, that meant that you were building in an error rate of around 30% into your decision making capability. So this is really significant in terms of driving innovation and improving quality, that we draw on that prestige-oriented leadership. And then finally, psychological safety is a key enabler, and this is our focus for today, essentially. And people will be wondering, what is psychological safety? And it's really about having a shared belief within a team or within a group of people that there is no risk, no interpersonal risk to speaking up to identify risks in the decision-making process or speaking up to put forward new, fresh ideas. And as we've said before, that's key to driving creativity and innovation in our decision-making. So those are the key enablers of inclusive decision-making. So where does it all go wrong? Well, it sometimes goes wrong when we encounter certain barriers. And the key barrier that people will be very familiar with will be bias. So a key barrier that we need to overcome is cognitive bias. And we know that this can have quite a detrimental impact on decision making in the recruitment process for staff, but it goes way beyond that. Bias impacts on all of our decisions. And bias is a tricky area because it's the way we make sense of the world as human beings. Because early on we're socialised into trying to categorise things and people in order to engage in that sense making, and to compare different groups with each other. But the danger comes when we actually start to develop a bias around people who are like us, which is positive, and people who are not like us, and we start to associate those groups with negative traits, and we start to form social biases. But as well as social biases, there are also financial biases. So sticking your head in the sand when you see poor financial figures, the ostrich effect, or a focus just on the short term when you really should be looking at the short, the medium and the longer term in order to deliver improvement and change. So bias can be a real key barrier to inclusive decision making and can completely derail your approach. So it's really important that you can manage and mitigate its impact. But there are other barriers as well that you'll encounter. So heuristics, for example. So what do we mean by a heuristic? So what we mean by that is sometimes as human beings, we get overwhelmed by the complexity of a certain situation, and we start to make these mental shortcuts to try and reduce the complexity of a particular task, where we have to make a judgment or choice. And a heuristic is really effective when you're making simple decisions. So which laundry detergent do I buy today? Do I buy Bold or Ariel? It's a simple decision. Or which pizza shall I order tonight? Pepperoni or Hawaiian? These are simple decisions that lend themselves well to those types of mental shortcuts. But when we're making decisions about the design of complex systems and services, then a heuristic can be very harmful. And when we also engage in things like our love of sameness, so we, in the classic phrase is, we're doing things like this because we've always done them that way. That's familiar to us. This is predictable and certain. So again, that love of sameness can act as a barrier psychologically in making optimal decisions. And then obviously dominance dynamics, where one or two people tend to dominate a discussion and suppress the insights of others. And that sometimes happens in a situation where you have a dysfunctional hierarchy, where the highest paid person in the room's opinion is the one that is listened to the most. But when we do that, we obviously can't draw on the benefits of collective intelligence. And then finally, echo chambers. So, when we sort of congregate with people like us and we just draw on the opinions of people who are like us, we enter into an echo chamber mentality where we're not looking for diversity of thinking and diverse options in our decision making. We're just merely looking for information that confirms our existing view and the existing view of people who are like us. So those were the enablers and barriers to inclusive decision making. But as I said before, in this session, we really wanted to take a deeper look at one enabler in particular, psychological safety. And we've got two definitions here, one from Amy Edmondson and one from Charles Duhigg. And Charles Duhigg, he did a lot of work looking at the Google approach when they were looking at, well, what makes a high performing team? And when we think about decisions being made very much in a team context, this is really important because there is a close relationship, as we've said, between inclusive decision making and enhancements in performance and quality. And so Charles Duhigg describes psychological safety as being about two things. First of all, everybody gets to speak in equal proportions. So there's that sense of fairness and you're able to draw on the collective intelligence of the group. And everybody in the team can pick up on the non-verbal cues of their teammates. So we've all been in a situation where we've looked around the table and we can, interpret the body language of our colleagues. And sometimes you might look at a colleague who looks disengaged. And what Charles Duhigg would suggest is a great leader in that situation who wants to very much practice psychological safety will be drawing on that mood in the group. And he would be asking those colleagues who look disengaged to actively contribute to the discussion and just checking in with them to see that they're okay, to create that trust within the group and to signal it's okay to be honest and open in that setting. And then the other sort of leading proponent of psychological safety, Amy Edmondson, suggests that it's a belief that neither the formal nor the informal consequences of interpersonal risk, e.g. asking for help or admitting failure, will be punitive. So another aspect of psychological safety is very much having an environment where you have a very positive view of failure as a source of learning and development, rather than as people just making an error or a mistake. So 2 definitions there of psychological safety that really draw on the culture and climate that needs to be created in order for this to be achieved. And we know that it's layered psychological safety. We know that, you know, it starts with us understanding what makes us feel safe. You know, so are we somebody who, for example, likes a lot of autonomy, but we find ourselves feeling psychologically unsafe when we're in a situation where the leader isn't adapting to the different styles of the team and is trying to promote a climate where there is very little or no autonomy. But it's also about our relationships as well with others. So once we understand what makes us feel psychologically safe, so the level of autonomy that we would expect in a team, the level of trust, and interpersonal engagement, we can then start to reflect on that in our relationships with others. And then at the team level, it's very much about a leader, you know, really modelling the way. So being prepared to highlight failure, not as something bad, but as a learning opportunity. It's also about leaders being transparent and open with their teams. And it's about being vulnerable as a leader yourself, admitting that you don't have all the answers and admitting errors that you make. And again, promoting that as a learning opportunity. And then finally, there is a psychological safety dimension to the wider culture. So this is about how we value and promote psychological safety in our organisations and the wider system. And it's about promoting psychological safety as a cultural standard and expectation, and incorporating it into our policies, aligning it to our health and wellbeing outcomes. So psychological safety is really important at the individual level, but it's equally as important at the relationship, team and cultural levels. And essentially all have to be in place for us to feel that sense of belonging and full inclusion. So why is it important, psychological safety? Of course, it's important in terms of our health and our well-being and our sense of belonging and feeling valued as individuals. But it can have an impact on our performance, both at the individual, team and the organisational level. And this image here kind of depicts the impact that it can have. I like to call this the energy curve. And as you can see, it's an inverted U. And what we see is there is a certain point where you are working at an optimal level, where you've got optimal energy levels and optimal stress levels. And by stress levels, we mean good stress, not the type of negative stress that impacts poorly on our health, but the stress we need to motivate us and to create that really great energy. But what we can see is there is a danger of us not just being overly stressed, but also being under stressed and under energized, and that leading to being demotivated in our roles, distracted, disorganized and forgetful. Well, what we want to be striving for as individuals and teams is that optimal, where as individuals and teams, we're focused, we're organised and we're responsible. And as we said before, closely correlated with that is that sense of inclusion and belonging, where we feel individually valued, but we also feel part of a team and feel that we belong there. And that's when we start to be able to draw on that collective intelligence of the group. So in terms of psychological safety, there is, of course, a model here, which is called safety. I've already touched on some of the elements today, but this model was actually developed by Dan Radecki and his colleagues, and is depicted in his book Psychological Safety, The Key to Happy, High-Performing People and Teams. And this model is really critical in setting out the key elements or the key components of psychological safety. So it is about having that sense of security, essentially. So by that we mean in our environment as individuals, sometimes we want consistency, we want commitment, we want certainty. We don't want things to be changing all the time. We want a certain level of stability in order to feel secure. That doesn't mean we don't like change. It just means we need a certain level of stability in order to feel secure. And when we don't, that can trigger certain emotional responses and impact our performance. The second area is autonomy. So we touched on this a little bit earlier. This is about our need to feel that we have control over our environment and that we have choices, that we're not just being told what the state of play is. We feel that we have the ability to influence what happens as individuals and in a team setting. And that's really critical. But we do recognise equally that there are, different people like different levels of autonomy, and it's important to get that balance right. So a leader in a team setting will need to be really mindful of the levels of autonomy that team members would expect to enjoy and be able to flex and adapt their style to facilitate that. And then fairness, which we've touched on already in terms of that sense of belonging and inclusion. But this is the most basic level of inclusion. This is about our need to engage in and experience fair exchanges, both in terms of those fair exchanges directed to us, but being able to actually see those fair exchanges directed to other people as well. So it's not just about how we feel we're being treated, it's about what we observe in our team and observing others being treated fairly and with respect. The next component of the safety model is esteem. And this is about our need to be regarded highly, which we all have. And this is obviously derived initially from how we see ourselves, but also from how other people see us and how we would like to be seen. And again, if that's compromised, that can have devastating effects in terms of our emotions and our behaviours. So again, esteem is a key component in terms of feeling psychologically safe. And then trust, which is really significant in a team setting. And this is about our social need to belong and to feel part of a group and a team, as we suggested earlier. But essentially, it's also about you and your preferences and your biases and your influences and how you've been socialised and how it interacts with all of those other components. And essentially, in order to achieve the safety model at different levels in our organisations and the system, we really need leaders that are able to actually understand what psychological safety is and foster that within their teams. So in terms of what can we do as leaders in order to foster psychological safety, Amy Edmondson's model is set out here on this slide. And what Amy suggests is it's about setting the stage, first of all, that we have to create a certain set of expectations around things like failure. So essentially, Amy suggests that there are 3 types of failure. There's preventable failure. So this is normally when somebody fails because they've deviated from a process that's then produced an unwanted outcome. So this might be linked to some kind of behavioural skills deficiency, and normally happens where people are deviating from processes. The second type of failure is described as complex failure. And this is much more about, those unexpected, unique events that happen unexpectedly, and is closely related to things like systems breakdown. And then you have intelligent failure. And this is really key to inclusive decision making and team performance and that sense of belonging. Because if we look at failing intelligently, that can actually drive the creativity and innovation that we talked about earlier. Because this is about experimentation and testing. So the type of activity that we do, around pilot work, projects, and trials, where we actually learn from that intelligent failure, and we use that knowledge to improve our approach, to improve our service delivery and design, to improve how we attract, retain and recruit staff, and the associated processes. So intelligent failure really is the aim when wanting to create that climate of psychological safety. But also setting expectations around uncertainty and interdependence, because we work in an uncertain world. Things are often changing all the time and at pace. So preparing people for that level of uncertainty, rather than reacting to it when it happens, is also key. And also clarifying the need for voice. So the need for everybody to have the opportunity to contribute their ideas, their perspectives. Again, drawing on that collective intelligence. And emphasising purpose. So identifying what's at stake, and why it matters. What are the consequences of what we're about to do, and for whom? So then you start to create what Amy would describe as shared expectation and meaning. So you have to actually create the right conditions for psychological safety to occur within that team setting. It won't just occur naturally. And there's a key role for leaders and managers in creating the right environment. And then secondly, there's responding productively. So it's great to encourage people to share their ideas and perspectives. It's great to encourage them to have a voice, but we have to enable people to be able to use that voice, but we also have to respond constructively. Because if we have a situation where we're encouraging people to speak up and to contribute, and the response is not constructive, that can have really significant impact on whether that person feels comfortable doing that going forward. So it's really important that we're able to respond productively and constructively. And we talked about this sort of area of being able to demonstrate situational humility. So for you as leaders to be vulnerable and to admit that you don't have all the answers and that you want to draw on the diverse ideas within the team. Practicing, inquiry, asking good questions and the right questions in order to, explore something in depth and gain insight, and modelling intense listening within the team. And equally, there's a need to set up the right structures and processes. So again, this won't happen through osmosis or naturally. In order to create the right conditions, we also have to create the right structures and processes. So providing forums for people to input and contribute ideas, providing guidelines for discussion that's respectful and that really allows everybody to contribute equally, following the Scott Dewig model of that proportionate and equal contribution. So then you create, a scenario where there's confidence that voice is welcome in reality and that we're responding productively. And then finally, Amy suggests that leaders should invite participation. So this is about obviously expressing appreciation. As we said before, it's about listening actively. It's about acknowledging contributions from team members when they do things well and thanking them. But it's also about destigmatizing failure. And as we said before, there are different types of failure. And if we focus on intelligent failure and we stop seeing failure as a negative, but as a learning opportunity, we can then drive improvement and we can then enhance performance. And then we can then increase that sense of inclusion and belonging. But equally make it clear that we're not sanctioning failure per se. So we don't want to encourage people to fail in an unintelligent way, and being clear that actually there are consequences for other types of failure, but trying to model failure in an intelligent way. And that then takes us to a position where we can continuously improve as teams, where leaders are creating the right environment. So we've talked about leaders quite a lot, and we're almost at the end of the presentation, but we can't underestimate the role of leaders and managers. But essentially, we need to reframe the role of leaders and managers. So sometimes there's a perception that the leader has all of the answers, that they're here to give orders and assess others' performance. But in reality, we know that that may not be overtly expressed, but it's sometimes observable in the norms and behaviours within a team, even though it's not overtly expressed. So we're not suggesting that this image of the boss as having all the answers and giving orders and assessing others' performance is always overt. It's sometimes quite covert and cultural. And this view that, you know, the leader and manager is there not just to assess others' performance, but they have subordinates who must do what they're told. But that obviously comes with certain risks in terms of proactivity and enabling other leadership at different levels. So what Amy Edmondson suggests is you need to reframe the role of the leader and manager as somebody that sets direction, but invites input to clarify and improve decisions. Again, it's going back to recognising the role of diversity of thinking and collective intelligence. But equally, the leader and manager should be there, as we've said, to create the right conditions around psychological safety, but also to facilitate that continued learning and high performance. And then finally, Amy Edmondson suggests that the role of leaders should be as contributors with crucial knowledge and insight. So is to foster a climate where team members are contributors with crucial knowledge and insight, rather than being there and being told what to do. So in order to create psychological safety, we have to enable our leaders and managers to reframe their role and create the right conditions for everybody to thrive and have that sense of belonging. And that concludes my presentation. So apologies for talking at you for quite some time. It'd be great to now hear your thoughts and questions.
Thank you very much for that presentation, Aloma. Marvellous. So as at the beginning, if there are questions to put to Aloma, please put them in the chat box. Aloma, I don't know if you want to have a little look through at some of the reflections from your earlier one.
Yeah, so great. Yeah. So yes, some really great reflections on the question I asked at the beginning of the session about, can you remember a time where you felt highly included, and equally when you made others feel that way? So, we've had comments here, one from Louise, who's saying every day in my job, when I'm working with my team of Teams colleagues, while working in Australia, it is a country built on immigration and lacks a class system. It says, your contribution is valued whether you're a chief exec or cleaner. Great comment. In a meeting, so this is about how Louise enabled others to feel highly included, and she's saying it was in a meeting and letting them talk and really listening. Yeah, absolutely. So picking up on some of the practice that Amy Edmondson sets out in her model around active listening. We've got Julie Warner-Williams, who's saying, when I made sure that a colleague was able to speak up at a meeting. Another comment here from Rebecca, including my team in key decisions, engaging with them and gaining thoughts and ideas. So there's lots of fantastic examples here that we can draw on and build on and practice in our daily roles, essentially. So thank you to colleagues who have contributed to responding to those key questions. Sorry.
No, that's fine, Aloma, that's fine. I was going to say, continue to invite questions in the chat box, but if I may kick us off, really. I was interested in what you were saying about vulnerable leadership and how, particularly with senior leaders who maybe don't do that, how do we encourage that kind of culture? So how do we encourage vulnerable leaders or leaders to show their vulnerability?
Yeah, I think it can start with sharing a story of an experience and encouraging leaders to share their own stories of situations where, they haven't had the answer and they have drawn on other people at different levels in their team to gain that insight. And so it is very much about sharing stories around how leaders have role modelled that vulnerability in practice to inspire others to do that, I think. And storytelling is really powerful as well, as in terms of a technique to use.
Thank you. Ruth's got a question.
Thank you, Liz. It was really just to pick up on that point in terms of vulnerability and vulnerability in leadership, because the use of the word vulnerability is something we've been discussing recently, but particularly in the context of people who might draw on our services and support. And actually, we're all vulnerable, and it carries quite negative connotations sometimes. People don't always like the word. So I do wonder whether actually what we're asking for is leaders who are reflective and honest and willing to give and show trust, as well as kind of expose where they might have some learning to do. So I suppose I'm posing the question about whether the use of the word vulnerable is in itself something of a challenge.
I think it is, because of the connotations of that word. When we think of vulnerable, sometimes we make that association with weakness, but actually it's a strength. It takes an enormous amount of strength and courage to be vulnerable and open about the fact that you don't have all the answers and that you need help from others to understand a particular issue. So I think sometimes, we're conditioned to really expect that word vulnerable to mean weakness when it really is about strength.
Thank you very much, Ruth. Any questions from anybody else? Thank you, Jackie. So Jackie's just asking if there are any resources that you can share. So do you have any resources or tips to become a better storyteller?
I'm aware of the storytelling toolkit that NHSE and I have developed. Happy to share that with colleagues. That was specifically developed around storytelling around service improvement, but could apply to different scenarios. So I definitely recommend that resource and happy to share it with colleagues that have attended the session.
That'd be great, and we'll follow up with that, Aloma. Thank you. And Rebecca's just saying as well and suggesting that there are some really good TED Talks on storytelling. Thank you, Rebecca.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Jill Adams, great session. Interesting to note the gender split on this call, vast majority of women. Wonder why that's the case. Any reflections on that, Aloma, or anybody else for that matter?
Yeah, it's really interesting, isn't it? Because very recently I've been to a few forums where there has been perhaps more of a male balance, certainly at a senior level, where I've got the impression that there's a barrier to overcome, really, in terms of this word inclusion. And I think whenever you include the word inclusion in the session, sometimes we have colleagues that disassociate themselves with it because they think that it's about certain groups, it's not about them. And so there's something, I think, around us really putting out the message that inclusion is about everybody. We all benefit from it. And it's not just about certain groups, it's about all of us. And I think when we start to really embed that message, I think we'll see, you know, a more inclusive makeup for sessions that are focused on inclusion.
Thanks, Aloma. Does anyone else have any reflections around that, or meetings that they've been to around inclusion in their own organisations or elsewhere? Be brave, folks. No? Okay. So we have got 7 minutes left on the call. Jo, did you want to just mention about evaluation?
Yes, I'll put the link into the chat box for people to click onto the evaluation. You can go into there as many times as you want to and just choose those sessions that you've just listened to. All I can say is the more times that you put in a survey, the more chances are that you may win at one of our prize draws. So get filling in.
Remind us of the prize, Jo.
Oh my God. Let me just open up an email.
Oh, now I've put her on the spot, sorry. Okay. There's a question as well, Aloma, people wanting to get in touch with you. Are you happy for us to share your contact details as well?
I am indeed, yes, happy for you to circulate my contact details. I'll try to get back to people as soon as possible, but don't worry if it's a couple of days before I get back to you. But please, yeah, happy to.
So the prizes are buy gift vouchers, Starbucks vouchers, Amazon vouchers, Sculpt Pottery, can't get my words out, Bloom and Wildflowers 3 months subscription, a grooming box, a beauty box, fitness subscriptions, Fitbit, and many more. So definitely fill in the survey.
Thank you very much, Jo. I'm afraid, Julie, no week in the Maldives there, so maybe next time, maybe next year. Yeah, the slide deck will be shared, and obviously the session's also been recorded, so that will be available on the Academy website as well. So we will make sure that those links go out to everyone. I would encourage you to have a look at the programme for the rest of the week as well. There's still some really great sessions to come the rest of today and also tomorrow and Friday. So if you can come to those, please do so. But other than that, thank you all very much for your time today. Thank you, Aloma, for a great presentation and have a good rest of your Wednesday. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.